to Kathmandu Triennale 2077 talk program on Gendun Chopel and Lo-Fi Speculative Cosmopolitan History. It's a mouthful. This talk was made possible with support from Kathmandu Triennale and Saraf Foundation grants and venue partner Taragaon Museum. So we're very happy to have Director of Taragaon Museum, Roshan Mishra, with us. Also the Director and Founder of Siddhartha Art Foundation and the Gallery, Sangeeta Thapaji. We also have the Director of the Triennale, Sarah Bhadrajarya, some participating artists as well, and we also have team members from the Triennale as well. So please do feel free to interact with them after the program. So we're really looking for a casual sort of interactive event. So yeah. So I'll just briefly talk about what this program is, and then maybe introduce Simon, and then Simon will do his presentation, and we have a discussant with us. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Okay. So, Kathmandu Triennale 2077 participating artist and art historian Simon Soon will be sharing his lo-fi speculative journey into visualizing a cosmopolitan history of Himalayan modernism by exploring the fascinating life of Gendun Chopel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly. And his work, A Treatise on Passion, published in 1939. Kathmandu Triennale curatorial assistant Tenzing Sedon Ukyab will draw connections to the Triennale's curatorial concept in responding to Soon's work and open the floor for an engaged discussion on the multiple and critical ways of thinking about Himalayan modernisms. So also keep these sort of themes in mind. If you have any questions afterwards, we'll open the floor for Q&A. A little bit about Simon. Simon Soon teaches art history at the University of Malaysia. His research interest on Southeast Asian and Asian modernities spans the 19th and 20th century, encompassing left-leaning art movements, batik and batik painting, history of photographic studios, modern architecture, history of the museum, visual culture of religious processions. He is currently a team member of the Malaysia Design Archive. It's an amazing sort of repository of visual archival material, so feel free to browse through their website. In his spare time, he photographs roadside shrines and visits tiny temples. Occasionally, he curates exhibitions and makes artworks. So please do follow him on Instagram, and also the project Gendun Chopel, a passion project, is also on Instagram. However, it will also be on display on 1st of March when the Triennale will have its physical launch. So feel free to come back again here and interact with his works again. So yeah, Simon, I'll hand it over to you, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Dipti, for the introduction, and thank you for the very warm welcome. First of all, I'd like to thank, of course, the Saraf Foundation, the Kathmandu Triennale team, and the Taragaon Museum for hosting this talk today. Of course, I will always need to start off with a disclaimer. I'm not normally an artist. I don't normally make art, but for some reason, Cosmin Costinas, who is the artistic director of the Triennale, has some way of convincing me to get involved in his sort of creative project and help him realize his creative vision. So occasionally, I become a kind of imposter in the art world where I'm made to sort of like create artworks. And so normally I would be the one sitting amongst you guys listening to the artist talk and trying to make sense of the artwork. But today I'm on the sort of like grilling chair instead. And so I hope that, I will be able to at least sort of share with you some of my processes and thinking that went into this project where I was invited to think alongside Gendun Chopel's Treatise of Passion from written in 1939. I believe it wasn't published then, it was published much later. Yeah, but he completed the work in 1939. And so just to sort of like give you an idea, what is the sort of like thinking process that went into, into how I created the work. So my relationship with Gendun Chopel started probably around 2013, and to the next slide. This is a painting installation by the Gendun Chopel Artist Guild. They're a sort of guild of artists who are inspired by Gendun Chopel artwork that I saw in the Latze Library in New York. I was there then on my way en route to a conference at Cornell, but I so happened to stop by at the library, and they had a collection of a digitized collection of his paintings, and they very kindly allowed me to sort of spend a lot of time going through them, and even gave me high-res versions of it for me to sort of study. So I thought that there was a real sort of sense of generosity with the library in sharing the material with me. Of course, I didn't know what I was going to do with the material because I'm no scholar on Himalayan art history. I'm principally a scholar who works on Southeast Asian art, and but I was fascinated by Gendun Chopel after watching the documentary The Angry Monk, I believe. Um, from there, I guess that sort of like germinated. I followed the work of Daniel S. Lopez Jr., who subsequently published a number of books on Gendun Chopel, and um, especially was instrumental in bringing out his scholarship in the English language, especially the art aspect of his the artistic practice of Gendun Chopel, and the opportunity came during my conversation with Cosmin and the Triennale team in Dhaka right before the lockdown, where they were trying to sort of get me to think about how I could, create an artwork that could be responsive to a context that maybe Nepali would also find. Nepal would also sort of like find resonance. So it took me a while to sort of get there. In the meantime, during the lockdown, all of us were stuck at home, right? I think all of us had a very unpleasant sort of like experience being at home, being in lockdown, and meanwhile, I was in conversation with Titi G here, constantly back and forth on WhatsApp, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I could do from my room, where I couldn't even sort of like leave my apartment, uh, and uh, and and of course then during that time it was also a period where I had a bit more time, so I started reading the treatise of fashion a bit more seriously, but parallel to that, what I was particularly drawn to was that I was going through social media a lot, especially Instagram, and I was particularly attracted to um, um, a genre of devotional images created by Malaysian Tamil youth, um, that they would use all these freely available softwares or apps on their phone to create music videos, and they're short music videos that are about less than a minute long that will be dedicated to a particular Hindu deity. And most of them are not the major Hindu deities that we know, but we're in fact sort of like minor, village and guardian deities, or we call them Aya Muni um, in Tamil sort of culture that that are that are rooted in sort of like family and folk sort of practice. So I was curious, like, what made them sort of like share so generously and so creatively. I want to share with you a few of these animation just to sort of get you excited. And also maybe they're also very, very funny in how they're sort of in how they are in how they are composed and put together. Okay, let's play one so that you have an idea what I'm talking about. Try the next one. I'll show you another one. I, Okay, you want to show the lion? Okay, you can show the lion first, and then I'll talk a bit more. So in this sense, I was blown away by all these special effects, right? And then these were these were not composed by designers. They're not like professional designers. They are young kids, probably from 19 to the age of 25. They're still studying or really just started out work. They have either full-time job doing an internship or still in college. And I'm curious what made them want to create this type of images, right? So I managed, and it's not very easy to sort of like approach them because of course a lot of them are a bit shy to share their experience and also their work process with me, and also they'll be curious, why does this sort of like Chinese man wants to find out why does this Chinese guy want to sort of find out about what I'm doing, and why is he interested in all these devotional images I'm creating and sharing online for free to everyone. So, but I managed to sort of like get hold of a few of them, and they even shared with me what softwares that they use, and through that process, I was trying to learn how to sort of compose and create them using some of these free software. And it turns out that it's not as difficult as it seems. So contrary to this idea of that, all these free software and all these free apps are contributing to a de-skilling of of a community of creative makers. I thought, in fact, they're actually democratizing and making it really much more accessible for young people to sort of like play with, the video medium and create and allow us to, share with us their vision of divinity and idea of divinity that I felt was very generous. I don't know what it was like here, but in Malaysia, at that time, there was a huge discourse around NFT. An NFT is really about sort of creating a kind of like copyright system for digital artworks, for digital creation, so that creators are able to monetize their creative projects, right? And parallel to that, I thought that okay, here you have a group of young people who are playing and experimenting and using all these sort of free softwares that are available, but also making these works and generously sharing them on social media, on YouTube. They create their fan pages. They have their own sort of like networks. They follow each other, and then they share it on WhatsApp and other family groups that they belong to. I felt that there was a generosity in that culture of sharing that I thought was very much needed during the lockdown period, especially when all of us were at home. This gave me like little pleasures every day as I was sort of like scrolling through my Instagram feed, and suddenly popped up, a Tamil guardian deity that is, that has a very comical sort of like character to it. They're not done in a very polished way, but they're cool in the way that you can still see all the super effects, sort of like the fireballs, the shining sort of like orb of light, and I wanted to sort of like try to learn how to make them to be able to understand what why these Tamil youths are sort of like creating these and making this sort of like and sharing them so generously. So I have another sort of like page where I do experiment with that. And at the same time, of course, then I needed to do something with my Gendun Chopel sort of like exploration. And as a result, I think because this was so much at the back of my mind and informed so much of what I was thinking about, and how I was thinking about creativity and the generosity that you could, create out of like, using all these free apps, that I wonder if this could be a methodology that I could be applied to how I would, explore the Gendun Chopel sort of like material, and hence the methodology sort of like aspect really comes from also a parallel kind of like thinking alongside these Tamil devotional posters that I was obsessed by during. I'm still obsessed by, but beginning from the pandemic sort of period. You want to go into the next slide? So, okay, you can show this. Uh, So as you can tell, like with Munishwara, with Periyachiyaman, all these are sort of folk village deities that are specific to Tamil Nadu. They're often also family sort of like deities that's passed down from generation to generation. And uh, to give you a bit of a background and a context, the Tamil population is about 10% in Malaysia, and they historically migrated to Malaysia over the course of the 20th century, principally to work in the plantation sort of sector. So as the city grows, of course, the plantation has shrunk, but the temples have survived. So in even affluent sort of like suburbs across, Kuala Lumpur, you would find a Hindu temple that is located in a marginal corner of an affluent sort of like suburb, and I they leave behind such a sort of like quiet, unobtrusive, but also quite visible kind of marker of um, in our sort of like urban landscape, and in a way, I wonder if you know uh, there's also a sort of like subaltern kind of like uh, uh, there's a sort of like subaltern expression that is sort of connected to how these youths who are of course followers and devotees and visitors of this temple who belong to all these temple complexes were sort of like trying to find a way to translate uh, uh, some of their aspirations and some of their vision into a new media. And I wonder if that could be something that is shared across the Asian sort of context, which I am over the course of the past 10 days, I've learned that yes, maybe there are sort of like common touch points that we can think about and think about collectively. And I'd like to hear more from you later, also what you think of all these videos and how and the translation work that I'm doing in trying to apply that particular creative methodology to the work I'm doing with the Gendun Chopel Treatise of Passion. So from there, of course, then I move into Treatise of Passion. And maybe we can sort of like play a video. So, so what excited me about Gendun Chopel was, of course, his sort of cosmopolitan vision in a time where, he was a traveler. He traveled south from Tibet, principally with a Sanskritist by the name of, I forgot his full name, Rahul San, San, Sanskritia. I can never pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry about that. Um, and he traveled all the way sort of down to Sri Lanka, right? And of course, he wrote about his travel. And I was fascinated about this worldly figure who really wanted to sort of embrace the world and see the world and participate fully in the world. And in some ways, I guess the Treatise of Passion, even though it's written as principally as a sex manual, um, reflects this sort of like desire and longing on many dimensions. Uh, so as I was trying to, um, find a way to respond to the text itself, I was initially attracted to, I guess, this cosmopolitan vision of Gendun Chopel. And so I began collecting visual materials from the internet. So as you all know today, there's so many materials, visual materials now available in the public domain. And principally using all these public domain visual materials, I started to put them together and apply the same principles as the Tamil use have, and see if I can sort of like use all these special effects to create a kind of what I call passion posters or devotional sort of like passion posters in order to celebrate something of his life. So this is one of the attempt where because of his sort of like travel to Sri Lanka, and I know that in Sri Lanka then there was a photographer by the name of Lionel Wen who was very instrumental in the modernist movement in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as they call it back then. And I sort of like took a bunch of his very highly sexually charged sort of like photographs, put them together, and put them in conversation with a passage that I picked from Gendun Chopel's Treatise of Passion. So as you can tell, the Treatise of Passion is a very, very graphic sort of text. It doesn't sort of like hold back in telling you all the different sexual positions you can sort of like imagine and dream of, right? It's like really his contemporary reading of the Kama Sutra, right? So if you want to go to the next thing, but I was also, so that's one dimension of it. So every day, what I would try to do is to um, do a bit of like fortune telling kind of like game with myself. I would randomly pick a page in a book and a passage, and then see if I can sort of like make sense of the passage and compose a series of sort of like bring together a series of images around a passage and string together an animation around it. But over time, of course, that's only one dimension to the project. The other dimension to it is then I was interested in that worldly cosmopolitan sort of like desire of Gendun Chopel, and throughout my and reading more widely about new scholarship that has come out, I've also realized that he was planning to go to the US and has plans to sort of like to work with a US sponsor to set up something called Tibetland in California, and with that, then I will that then sort of like allowed me to sort of think of, okay, what if he was dreaming about that. So a lot of these the way I assemble the images comes from a speculative idea of thinking through what if he wants to what if he were to sort of like go over to the States, would he have gone to sort of like Mexico, would he have gone and met a Haitian met the Haitian sort of like surrealist artist Hector Hippolyte, and and in these moments of sort of like thinking and dreaming, you see this sort of like this collision of images, basically taken from 1930s and 1940s sort of like visual culture and art from across the world, where I'm trying to see if there is a Gendun Chopel sort of like response to it. So this is one of them where I'm trying to sort of like put him in conversation with Haitian sort of like art, where I speculate that he encountered Hector Hippolyte, who is a voodoo artist and also high priest in a dream sequence, and have them in conversation where a Haitian sort of like deity would instruct him the arts of love. And I make sure I include all the special effects. So that's the actual Tibet land. I turned it into a mandala and made it an offering and a voodoo bear sacrifice. And of course, the tantric sort of like entrails offering, which wouldn't be out of place, of course, in the Tibetan voodoo ritual. Thank you. So this is slide more. Of course, then soon I got sort of like I got stuck. Right, there's a lot of sort of like hurdles throughout the sort of how the whole process of trying to sort of figure him out, and I guess over the course of trying to you know test what is the extent of his cosmopolitan vision, I would also then learn from Dipti about different types of different the different the diversity of some Nepali culture, and I was particularly struck by Meg Limbu's work, and hence that's why there's this work here that I created, trying to make sort of like batik with the Saka Silam Satma. And in some ways, then I'm also then trying to sort of like find that his connection with Southeast Asia, right? And of course, I'm a bit of I'm also an academic, so I have to read his academic papers and stuff like that. And I came across a recently published paper where about Dharmakirti's the exact location of where Dharmakirti was sort of like teaching, who was the teacher of Atisa. So I then created this sort of like video, um, trying to sort of yeah, you just watch. So the new research suggests that Dharmakirti was in fact from Kedah, which is in northern state in the peninsula Malaya, and there was like even a graphic sort of like even a graphic schema that explains the kind of geographical landscape that he was seeing that would pinpoint and locate the location of where he originated from. And so I was fascinated by that and sort of used that to then sort of compose this that video where it ends with the Kala Chakra Tantra. Of course, we know that Kedah was eventually invaded by the Chola Empire, and so the Kala Chakra Tantra then sort of like took on also the tantric kind of like eschatology, then also sort of like took on um, significant resonance not just in the Tibetan Himalayan region but also in Southeast Asia as well, because of the invading sort of like colonial imperialist force coming and sort of taking over the land where Dharmakirti originated from. And I wanted to play with all those things. I wanted to end with maybe an image of a video. I'm not going to play the video, but this is the sort of like beginning of the video, and you can watch it on the Instagram. But what I did was to superimpose an image of a jinn, which is like how do you describe a jinn um, here? It's like yeah, like a wish granting sort of like spirit. It can be malevolent or benevolent, depending on that particular sort of like that jinn, and it's common in the Malay world because of Islam, right? And I superimposed an illustration from a historical Malay manuscript onto you know a painting of Lhasa, where you have Potala at the center, and when in sort of like Tibetan painting, you often also sort of find that there is this representation of the pinning down of Srinmo, the goddess or demoness sort of like figure, as that sort of like foundational moment where you build the Tibetan Buddhist sort of like civilization on, right? And so pinning down the sort of like female subject in order for, you know, the male, so the male Buddhist order to sort of emerge from. What I did in the video was then sort of see if I could sort of like subvert it, and in the video itself, I not only introduced this sort of like image, but then drew on another sort of a Javanese sort of like uh, rice paddy sort of couple deity, in order to sort of suggest that perhaps there's a different way to also think about male and female social compact. It doesn't need to always be about female subjugation and oppression in order for, you know, teaching and knowledge to sort of like emerge from. And maybe I'll end there as a way to sort of, you know, conclude my speculation, where I'll leave then to Sedon La to perhaps give a much more historically accurate and contextual reading and also critique of Gendun Chopel's sort of writing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Simon. It's always fascinating to listen to you talk and share your thoughts. I'll just briefly introduce Sedon. I just am so used to calling you Sedon. So Sedon is a graduate from SUNY, New Paltz, with a degree in art history and public relations. With a family background in antiquities and her long-standing interest in Himalayan art, has led her to work with various creative communities and organizations such as Rubin Museum of Art, Tibet Museum, Machik, and various collectives art studios in Lhasa. In 2021, she co-founded Ziba Space, an online art initiative that highlights perspectives in art and culture. She's passionate about Himalayan contemporary arts and antiquities, and is collaboratively working with artists and craftsmen in the art world. Born in Nepal, Sedon's education and experience span Nepal, India, China, and the USA. Sedon is also part of the curatorial team. And thank you so much for agreeing to be the discussant for Simon Soon's work. Yeah, please go.
Thank you, Dipti, for the introduction, and thank you, Simon, for the wonderful presentation. Yeah, I do not have really elaborate graphics, but I hope I can do some justice to Simon's beautiful presentation. So what I have here is a bit of Himalayan modernism to begin with. So this is a Tibetan calendar that shows you, once you put your birthday and your time of date, like when you're going to have a negative day. And unfortunately today is like a really bad and a negative day. You can see it with the red dot there, and it's like a dangerous day dominated by bad reaction. Virtue and morality meet obstacles and opposition. So I guess if the talk goes bad, I would just blame it on the stars or on that. Okay, moving forward. So Gendun Chopel, I'm not an expert, but having read a lot of, having had the opportunity to be a discussant, and as I've been reading more on Gendun Chopel, I just thought maybe a brief overview of his life would kind of give a more in-depth perspective, and then we can move forward with more of what I would like to talk about my reaction on the Treatise of Passion as I was reading it. Um, so Gendun Chopel was born in 1903 in Repcom, and he actually first started studying, entered the local monastery, and where he started training as a monk. And then later, since he was a really bright student, later he was able to go to Lhasa and study in Trebung, which is one of the more larger institute and more important institutes there. He was a great debater, and in 1934 he met um, Rahul Sanskrita Yayan, an Indian researcher with his teaching. And it is said that just before he was about to graduate and get his like Geshe La, like which is like one of the most like renowned like a status, he left to with Rahul to go travel and collect rare manuscripts all over the plateau and Tibet. And while doing so, he was able to actually also go to India and explore a lot, and then where he actually was able to encounter and write through his experiences what we see the Treatise of Passion. So when he returned to Tibet in 1946, he was actually arrested in Lhasa and put in jail for about 3 years. In 1949, he was freed but died shortly after. Um, I think it's very important to also like kind of see him like look at his life story, because he was definitely like breaking boundaries in itself. Like there were stories like he would always go into arguments with his teacher, and he was a great debater and he would win, and there were like really interesting stories. And he was also called a madman for a lot of reasons, and because he was always questioning and probing. And there was also one interview that I saw that a guy was saying that he used to smoke and then blow the smoke on the Buddha statue. And yeah, so it's really interesting when you see it. But when you look at his work, there's this really interesting podcast called Keltham, where it kind of did dive into how he wasn't a radical skeptic per se, but a pious one. And I think that's a really interesting analogy, because a lot of his life work when he was researching was also like he was a positivist historian, so he was always trying to find the root of what Tibet was, and he was always trying to let history speak for itself. So I think one of the very interesting facts about Yundun was like, while he was traveling, he had all these maps, because when he was in India and traveling, he had access to the railways that were coming, to a lot of the missionaries that were there, the colonists that were there, and then he was drawing like how the world is round. So he was drawing all these maps. He was exploring realism. He was actually a very skilled painter, and so he was also exploring realism, and he was, and so like while his effort, right, was actually to go back home and like prove, like, here, this is proof, like, there's so much happening outside, because at that time Tibet was a bubble, and we didn't have the railway, or we were kind of slow, let's say, a bit on like getting all those things. And then so he was trying to go back and prove like, oh, there's proof that the world is round, and all of these aspects. And I think that was really interesting. So yeah, I think moving on to the next slide, I have a small video, and this is Getashi Sringla. So this video briefly talks about how even in his Buddhist and religious drawings, he was very realist in nature and used his common sense. So we have these auspicious signs of many things, like we have the endless knot, we have the golden fish, you know. And so what he did was, instead of drawing the fish out of the water like we usually do, he made sure to draw it in the water, the fish in the water, which was actually what makes sense, right? Because fishes can't live outside of water. So even while he was drawing these with the symbols and things, he was using his common sense and being a realist in some aspects. So that's, I think, I guess, a brief introduction to who Gendun Chopel was as a person. And now moving to I would say, some of the notes or things that that I wanted to highlight while I was reading the Treatise of Passion. It was my first time. I just read it like a few days back, and I was while I was going through the text, I found this very disturbing in the beginning for a bit, because I did see there was quite a lot of objectification of women, you know, in the text, which I would like to highlight for a bit. So you can see out here, it talks about like, okay, so I'll just go through the experience. So there's a part where they were about moles in a woman's body. So as to where it is placed, on the left or the right side of the body, you would know if a woman is like domesticated or is beautiful or will have wealth or won't have wealth. And while I was just going through this text, I had the moles in all the wrong places. So I would, yeah. So so just like that scrutiny that I just put myself through while reading all of that, and in the end he says, "But you know, this is not as reliable." But you put me through all of that, right? It was just funny, and I just thought to bring it up. So similarly, if you can see here, it talks about how if one has sex on these days, it is most suitable and vile deed. If there is a conception on the 11th month, 11th, 13th, or 15th day, because it will be a girl, it should be avoided. So I think like these are small notes that I wanted to highlight, like regarding how women's body has been always under so much scrutiny now, and it still is, I do believe, up till today. And I would just like to open up and like elaborate like my feelings on this a conversation, because to a certain extent what I noticed was domesticated women were the kind of women you want to keep. And then there was also this line that was yeah, there was also this line that went on to say like, I would teach you, there's a text on how you can tame an untamable woman, but it isn't needed in the context of Tibetan women. So I think these are some things that I just wanted to like briefly bring it up, and I think like just highlight for a bit as my reactions to the text. Otherwise, I think it was if it was a really contemporary work, I would say, and I think it would have been much needed in that time and era to kind of break the boundaries. And obviously, he's speaking a lot of this out of his personal experience, right? But I do still feel that it is a very limited view of what humans are. You know, it's not regarding a female body or a male, but who identifies as what. I think I do feel it to a certain way a very limited perspective of passion, you know. So putting that there. I think moving forward, I will just talk a bit about Gendun Chopel Artist Guild, which co-opened in 2003 by 10 Tibetan and 2 long-time resident Chinese painters in Lhasa. It was the beginning of something big, a bold attempt to remake a cultural bond bound by centuries of tradition hemmed in by narrow stereotypes. So Gendun Chopel Artist Guild was actually at its time a very important a contemporary guild or collective it really shaped a lot of the Tibetan contemporary art itself. And so, like, just if we can move forward, um, and what we have like, oh, we can't see the text here. The text seems to be missing, but okay. But regardless, what I would also like to bring to note is that they had only one female contemporary artist that actually joined much later. Her name was Gendun, and that's her painting called Mona Lisa. And she's actually going to be a part of Kathmandu Triennale as well. So we're really excited to have her work as well. So just pointing that out as well, you know, like, and then just like how uh, sometimes I question why progress uh, always kind of caters to the idea of I don't know how to kind of place it well, but why isn't progress also like uh, including women in their circle and pushing them forward as well, right? I think to be a contemporary is to travel, to write, to acknowledge, but the fact that women were still seen as objects, not as equals, is something I just wanted to kind of highlight in that process. I think I am quite a feminist, and I couldn't unsee this while I was reading this, so I just had to share that. And so moving forward, this is the last text. This is actually an exhibition that happened in Song. I really, yeah, Songsuan, yeah. And so I think what I wanted to highlight with this perspective is what is happening is very interesting, because there was a time when Gendun Chopel was trying to uh, modernize people in Tibet. You know, they was like, oh, there's the railway. You know, the world is round. We can fly now. There's this, and so, but now what's happening is like the Gendun Chopel Artist Collective and artist collectives inside of Tibet, or I think in the Himalayan region, are trying to convince the West that we are not, we are modernized. You know, that struggle, like to say that we are not barbaric as you think. We have moved forward. We have access to luxury. We have Coca-Cola. We have Budweiser. You know, and we are not. You know, we are the Shangri-La image. I think is what now we are trying to prove to the West or outside of our community that we are modernized. Whereas in contrast, when Gendun Chopel was there, it was quite the opposite. So just like, I think I would just like leave it at that point, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sedon. I was fully expecting a feminist reading of Gendun Chopel, and I'm really happy that you did that. And I think Simon and I forgot to mention that Simon was also able to do a digital workshop with few select interested um, people in Gendun Chopel, and I think that was one of the prominent discussion was, is this text problematic, and if so, how do we read it, and does it have a potential to be subverted? And I mean, that's up for discussion. But before I open the floor for questions from you all, I would like to give Simon an opportunity to also respond to what Sedon has shared to all of us.
Thanks, Shadon, for the wonderful, wonderful reading and response. What particularly struck me was when you played the video and the figure, what's his name? Tashi Seri. What he was saying, what he was emphasizing in his reading of Gendun Chopel struck me as really interesting when he was making a case that Gendun Chopel he was insisting that Gendun Chopel was on the side of reason, and I think it is because Gendun Chopel was on the side of reason that you see all these classificatory sort of like schema that he has sort of like built up and designed and devised to sort of like, you know, categorize women and also men, and also sort of like different objects and things, yeah, you know, that he has observed and see the world, right? Because he was really seeing the world through the eyes of rationality and reason, and maybe there's a danger to sort of like that, right? And But I know that in, of course, in his sort of like, you know, in his understanding of sort of like Madhyamika philosophy, he is also sort of like trying to read against it. But I can't help but see that, in the way he has sort of like approached the treatise of passion, uh, he has overemphasized and over celebrated that dimension of reason and rationality that now we have become increasingly suspicious of. And rightly so, because then uh, what is passion but emotion, right? It is definitely not something that can be rationalized or can be sort of like put into words that or communicated in in a clear manner. So I thought that was very resonant. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Uh, I think like I think I kind of laid down quite a lot of my thoughts here. But yeah, definitely the idea of passion I think was limited. I think it was very kind of directed to pleasure, whereas I think passion can be a range of emotion. And I also would like to point out one aspect is like when he talks about passion, he talks about passion that he encountered. Um, Whereas I think a lot of how he was able to even write this was because he was encountering and going around and the kind of he was using women in different countries or places, and he was sleeping a lot basically, and that's how he was like, writing a lot of these his all of his works. And I always think about the perspective of the women sleeping because they're obviously sex workers, most of them, I believe. And so, what is their perspective on passion is also something. What would they crave? Would they crave a bodily engagement as a passion, or would they want someone to care and be with them or accept them? And I think these were some of the questions that also came up, right? We are looking at one aspect, one dimension, but there are so many layers to what it could be, and I think that's something that was also something that it came up while I was thinking, is what were they feeling? What is their perspective on passion?
Thank you so much. Just like to open the floor for questions. So if anyone has any question or comment or feedback or reaction, please feel free to do so. And we have with us a friend who's helping with the mic. So anyone has any comment, feedback, could you just raise your hand. Um, anyone? Okay. Maybe also introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Cynthia. Listening the train and supporting.
You
hello.
might have to.
Oh, hello?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Maybe two things. One, very direct, just more information about his imprisonment. What was I don't know, the cause of his imprisonment when he went back to Lhasa?
Why was he? Uh, uh, Based on my limited understanding, he was involved in the Tibet Improvement Party, or he was implicated. There wasn't actually any sort of like clear evidence that he was directly connected to the founding of the Tibet Improvement Party, and it was a party. It was a reform. It was a reform-minded party that was accused of receiving the support of the Chiang Kai-shek government, the Republic of China sort of like government money and funding, and hence that's why he was immediately put into the stocks when he returned back to Lhasa. In fact, I don't think he was also very much. He was caught unaware, and suddenly found himself being sort of like in prison, and that caused quite a bit of disillusionment on his part. Am I right, Sedon? Sagita?
Oh, sir.
I just wanted to know more. Like, had Sedon, had you heard about Gendun Chopel before? And what was your encounters with Gendun Chopel, if you had heard about him, and how does it play out in your own research?
So yes, I have heard about Gendun Chopel, but I haven't actually read a lot of his work. So I haven't had I did know of him and his stories because we do have it quite in the Tibetan academics. We do explore that quite a lot in the West as well. And but I never had a chance to actually read any of his works. I do know of him, and I think this was the first one that I did actually read. Um, and I think I, I I think like I do not know a lot about his other works, and maybe I am a bit critical about his work in Treatise of Fashion is because I am at that point in life where I am very uh, I am also encountering those kind of gazes, as a female or as someone who identifies as female. Let's say that. Um, so I think I never did encounter his work, but I do know he has written exceptional works and commentaries, I believe, and that are very vital and very important um, conversations and texts because we do not have a lot of contemporary writers who are writing differently, um, and so he was one of them. And sadly, what I do know is like a lot of his works have been lost. We do not actually have. So what I read in one of the papers was the bios is that when he was in prison, he used to write a lot and draw a lot. So a lot of his written works, texts, and notes, when he came out of prison, were missing. So he did not have them. And there was also this really interesting um, uh, story, like a question that was brought up is that since we do lack in a lot of contemporary writers who were like writing at that time, like he was, is that he was actually invited to teach at Rabindranath Tagore School in Shantiniketan. And I heard this on Kaltam. Please do check them out. It's a really good podcast. And they were talking about what if he had taken up a position as a teacher there. And as we know, Rabindranath Tagore and his works, how he's recognized, would we have had much more to read on him and about him than the limited texts we do have? But sadly, hopefully in the future, I will be able to read more of his other important works. Yeah.
I think around 2007 and 2008, the Gendun Chopel Guild artists exhibited at the Siddhartha Art Gallery, 2008, 2009, for the first edition of the Kathmandu International Art Festival. One of the guild artists was also participating. But I'm really fascinated by the story of the moles. Uh, and I'm thinking how many women he must have, passed through to say, okay, the mole on the left side, and then, it's an experiment, right? But it also has parallels in Hindu, Sanskrit, the cosmology of the body, where you can find a very similar thing. When you meet with an astrologer, they say, "Do you have a mole?" And then I'm thinking that this is a parallel sort of projection of the body's cosmology.
In many ways, I agree with you. But I guess what's interesting is he's taking it to the next level, right? So that's not just Indian women he's meeting. He has also a throwaway line on the Malay women being very fierce and liking to sort of like ride on top of men, and he has also comments on sort of like white women. So he was also, in a way, in that sense, he was as problematic as that portion of the text. It sort of like gives you an idea of the whole the range of sort of like people he was encountering, and it's really unfortunate that we're only getting his perspective on things. So I think your question on where's the female agency, where's the female sort of like subjectivity, their perspective would have really sort of like bring a different sort of like color and understanding to his text. So the more reading his text is like, okay, it's going maybe one step forward and maybe two steps forward, one step back, kind of like there's that sort of like sense of how I'm engaging or responding to the text. He ends his treatise of passion by actually acknowledging his partner for all that she has taught him and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, that the text itself is gone through like so many sort of by partners, and they just become like a category of his empirical exploration of sexuality. So he's such a walking contradiction, and yeah, but I'm glad that we're having actually this conversation, because this is the conversation that if we apply our contemporary lens and looking back at someone of his time, we can see moments where he can be seen as someone who's very progressive, but at other times, he's also someone who's rooted in his time and place, and that and he needs to be held accountable to his actions.
So I very much had a very similar response to Sidon while I was reading the Passion book. And it was a very personal response, a very feminist response. And I was part of your workshop where we had to make the Passion posters. So during that process, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to include all these Tibetan women voices in the Passion poster itself. So for me, in my head, I was thinking of really including the voices of the brashest, most comfortable with their sexuality, these Tibetan women that I see in public media right now. A rapper whose name is Tipchik, who's very famous in Tibetan exile, and also another Tibetan rapper based in Lhasa, who's very much embraces her sexuality as well. So, I mean, I got very encouraged and I downloaded a music mixing software. I was gonna make a remix out of their song. I didn't end up doing it, but yeah. So that was like my feminist response. Yeah. In terms of while I was reading the book as well, I was wondering. I mean, for me, it felt very pornographic, and not in this. I mean, in a sense where there is a history of pornographic material where people read for pleasure, their erotica. So I was wondering, how does the Passion book stand in terms of this line of erotica that people read for pleasure back then, and also if some of Gendun Chopel's sketches also explored some of that, and also how widely the Passion book was available when it was published, and how secretly or openly people read it. Well, people read it while they were masturbating, probably, So I had a lot of these thoughts went through my head, and I also had another question in terms of Gendun Chopel as this icon that you see the Gendun Chopel Artists Guild. So they've taken on his name as part of their identity, and for Simon, you to look to Gendun Chopel's work and then now be here talking with us. And then I'm just wondering for Tibetan artists, contemporary artists, and artists coming of this age, how they would look to Gendun Chopel as well, and what is Gendun Chopel's appeal to them, and is there a risk of also like fetishizing his, I guess his status in Tibetan history and in the Tibetan art world?
I'm gonna leave the big question to you, only to quickly say how I'm, trying to work through the text and then struggling with it with all its sort of like problematics. Um, the way I sort of like make peace with it is that I, you, as an academic, I would never have sort of like written on him because I'm not a Tibetan studies expert, but putting on an artist hat, it gives me the liberty to play around with the creative medium and use that creative medium as an opportunity to sort of open up a conversation to friends and colleagues and people out there in the world. And having this conversation is an outcome of that sort of like that 4 or 5 month long sort of like period of exploration and experimentation with the video posters. So I see this as a sort of like opportunity to open up a sort of like conversation. I'm very thankful for that opportunity because I too learn so much from having this opportunity to engage with so many people through both the workshop and we said online and also with everyone here today. Thank you.
I'm really not sure how to answer the question because I think I can't speak for like a community, and I haven't read enough actually. I'm being very honest, like I did mention before. This is the first book that I'm actually reading of his, and I think this is more of the work that he's written in terms of, you say, the topic that we are talking about in terms of erotica, and it's a more personal experience, and he's trying to create. Um, I'm. I do know that there is quite a lot of people researching, and they do kind of. A lot of people know again who Gendun Chopel is, like how I did, because we do hear his name a lot, from our parents, maybe from our professors, from our friends. They do refer him from time to time as the madman or the angry monk. We have the movie as well, so there are references, but I'm not sure if I am able to answer if we are fetishizing. I'm sorry, fetishizing him or not, because I I haven't read enough, but I do think like this text in itself, like how we do find like a similar like reaction. We had a similar reaction. I do think that this text should be something that we need to talk a bit more about and kind of talk about, like the views on that, because I think even um, with Tibetan Buddhism, we have the Mahamudra, which is actually something that's very essential to Tantric Buddhism, right? It's and where the male is the practice and the female is the wisdom, and the union of it is what creates enlightenment to some, or the light, Um, so there are like mentions, but there are also taboos, right, in aspects. So I think in this particular topic, I think like I would say that my opinion is like um, maybe we need to also talk about his works in terms of his personal works as well, and highlight that it is problematic, and just like, again, once more bringing my question out in regards of a progressive. What is progressive? What is cosmopolitan? You know, um, what is it? But why does it always lack like? Why does it still yet have this view of women as objects, regardless? You can be a prolific writer, a great writer, but if one doesn't acknowledge a woman, and doesn't and objectifies that body, and continuously uses it as in to create categories, like Simon did say. So I think there are like I would say I have like a dilemma, I would say, but I do not to make it short. Like, I'm not sure. I can't speak for the community itself, and that's, I think.
on the point of what if, right? I do wonder if so far the scholarship on Gendun Chopel also has been dominated by male scholars, right? In a sense that yeah, as a what if, I'm always sort of like curious. What if like someone like Janet Getzel would write about Gendun Chopel? What kind, as a scholar who works on, Tibetan autobiography, as a specific sort of like genre to sort of Tibetan literature, what kind of perspective would she bring um, to our understanding of Gendun Chopel that might perhaps provide a much more nuanced sort of like understanding, a much more complex sort of like understanding of how he negotiated with tradition, but also how he problematized it, but in many ways also was a victim of this history and tradition. Any other question?
Hello. Yeah, I had one question. Gendun Chumbe, quite cold. So Gendun Chumbe traveled to journey to India. So did he travel via Nepal or not? This is one question. And the another one is his record he traveled to India and Sri Lanka. But did he travel out of Sri Lanka or in India? There is one photo that he traveled to Bhutan, and some said not, it's not in Bhutan or it's in Manali. So little.
I know he went past Nepal. I was trying to look for that information as well, only because that the work has to be created in response to a Nepali context. I know he did spend time in sort of like Nepal, but there was not very much information on what he did here except collecting manuscripts and with Rahul, and that was all I know that he did what he did here. But he didn't really sort of like talk very much about what he saw and things like that. He did spend more time sort of like describing the things that he saw in Sri Lanka. I think he, but he, if on your second question, if whether he traveled outside of the Indian continent, putting in plans to sort of like travel over to the US, but that did not materialize. Yeah. So the project fell through. He was supposed to go over to California to help sort of like kickstart or lead and a sort of like hippie kind of like commune called Tibetland, but that never materialized. Tibetland still exists as a garden today, so you can still go there and see it. There's a garden complex there, but that dream of crossing the waters over to the US never came about. I hope I answered your question.
I'm not a Gendun Chopel historian, but I did read a passage. I should have actually taken the screenshot. He actually mentioned Nepali women also in his book, and he specifically mentioned it was like the Kuta Jogo, like yeah. So I think yeah, he was being very critical about it, but he did he did mention. I think he did come to Nepal. Maybe he didn't write a lot, but he did write about the women in Nepal. So
Clearly, he was philandering his way through.
Hello, Testate. Thank you both for a wonderful talk. And yeah, from what I know, Gendun Chopel was in Patan and Bhaktapur area, and also he's been to Bhutan, and he wrote all the. There are lots of ghost writings that he has done about like army and everything. And when he was in Bhutan, even the king of Bhutan was a little bit scared because he's also a cartographer. He was doing all the map and everything. And regarding the earlier thing, I just have, because there are a lot of people, they might think Gendun Chopel is like a sexist and all this stuff. So I have to just extra opinion. First, I think Gendun Chopel, when he wrote Debut it was not his own creation. Was already an existing literature. He looked at around 25 of it, of which he based 5 main books, and then that book was written. And when he wrote that book, it was a tantric text, so it was not really. But sometimes when you talk about Kama Sutra, we are really talking about the positions and all these things, but not really. He was actually trying, and in one of the line, he would say, if man and woman can face each other straight with honesty and dignity, then you don't need all the idols or the deities on the altar. You can all throw it away, and the corpse of these two would be enough. So there are statements like that. Also on Tamkyusar Gitama, the Cosmopolitan book you're talking about, in that book also he talks about, he's also critiquing how British has invaded India, and at the same time he was also critiquing how in India there is a child marriage, which is bad. So he's very much, I think, a feminist in a way. In the Passion book also, he would say, you can't really know the meaning of enjoyment or blissfulness without the woman being happy. So these are also a statement or a counter statement. I thought it'd be interesting for public to know. And so they were like what Madam said. It was really based on earlier lots of taxes, and like rightly you said, like, and he would say this doesn't make sense. And sometimes he would say, I did this in one come and there one woman, and then it didn't happen. Maybe you guys try it. So it was very, the book was very experimental, kind of a journal, like diary. So those are again counter things, and in the end, Kama Sutra is really about when lots of pleasure comes within you, how to still be aware and calm. So, so it takes you to another level, like what you were talking about, compassion, union of all those things. So it becomes a very tantric text. So I thought I'll add that to all the great things you said. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. Those are very good reminder. What I've also found inspiring about the text. There are definitely those sort of like moments where you see him as this progressive figure, and also someone who's like really introducing a new way of sort of like thinking and seeing the world based on his experience of the world, right? Based on his exposure to things that are happening around, and but at the same time, yeah, the challenge is how do we sort of like reconcile these two sort of like very opposing, seemingly sort of opposing sort of like characteristic, and that's the challenge for us today in our day and age to sort of like think through these two opposing poles. And so thank you so much for bringing that.
Maybe we have time for 2 more questions.
Can I also add something? I completely agree, Vidula, what you're saying. I think, but I think it also takes time, I guess, to get to understanding people. I think, and I think I also want to point out that whatever we say, it's not fact. It's always a learning curve and as a learning process. And I think maybe I will acknowledge that even though my first encounter while reading the book, like I did say, I read it 2 days ago, is very critical. I would say it is, and but as I did say that maybe as I read more of his works, which I haven't, things might change, because I cannot also say for a community because this is just something that I'm starting to read about or learn, and I'm not going to deny he was a great writer and has contributed a lot to the society. I think we all accept. But I think the chance to be critical is also something we should be thankful about. And that's, I think, maybe a lot of times we do that when we read something, the first time. And I think, yeah, just thank you so much for sharing that as well.
Hello, hi, I'm Sedon. On a lighter note, I just wanted to add to Kiana's question about not being able to go to America. He was denied a visa, as I understand it. So Gendun Chopel did not get his visa to the United States at that time. So that's why his trip to the US didn't work out.
Sorry, do you mind repeating?
Repeat that,
again?
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
On a lighter note, just like we all face problems getting visa to America, Gendun Chopel, I believe, did not get a visa at that time, so he could not build Tibet land.
The struggles of getting visas. more questions.
Tristile. I have one question. When we reading Gendun Chopel book on philosopher and the artist book, his mind so opening, modern mind. But he is born in 140, something like that. So how is he getting influence, open mind, and modern arts? Where he getting ancient, also Western, Tibetan, but his mind is so open and modern art. What do you look? Where we he getting influence, open mind.
Maybe through my guess is it's through travel, through meeting people, and people who are different from him. He has the opportunity to also see the world and learn about other people's culture. I think India back then, have people from all over the world, right? And as he was traveling down, and as all of us are travelers today, we encounter people we don't know, we encounter strangers, and
In India, Tibetan, but his mind so open. Then how is he getting influence, modern mind open?
I think just questioning, I guess, I think that's the main thing. If you keep questioning, if you keep continuing to question, and if you keep trying to find the answers, you 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 go through the process of opening up more, right? We all at a point today, but in a year we are questioning. After all the questions we've had and answered, we're going to be much more different, and I think more open. I guess I think I would just say being able to ask the questions and trying to seek those. I think maybe it was travel, maybe it was through experiences with others, maybe it was noting down what he saw. Yeah, I guess I think that.
Okay, I think last question, and then
Sorry, I thought there was no more questions. So, you mentioned before about the Dharmakirti and Atisha.
Yeah.
So, I was not clear about the relation between Atisha and Dharmakirti. So can you please elaborate a little bit, like 1 minute? It's fine.
okay.
Thank
I know there are many Dharmakirtis, but there was one, that is said to be Atisha's sort of like teacher, and he's known to be from Southeast Asia, and in historical literature, he's said to be from Sumatra, which is an island in Southeast Asia that is Sumatra Island. But recent scholarship have suggested he's actually from the peninsular side of Malaya in Kedah, which is like a kingdom up north on the peninsula coast. Yeah. So what I was trying to introduce in the video is perhaps not just sort of like trying to find my connection to the Gendun Chopel sort of like story by looking back at history, right? By saying, okay, that if there's a historical connection to sort of like Southeast Asia, what is this sort of like historical connection? And using that as a way to help me to understand my connection to the Gendun Chopel sort of like story as someone who's looking at this history from all the way back in Southeast Asia. I hope that answers your question. I don't know if.
Any final thoughts?
So maybe the last thing is actually to encourage everyone to read his texts, because the only danger is that especially in where I come from in Malaysia, we have a very strong sort of like Malayan nationalist kind of like politics where everyone is championing sort of like Malay literature and stuff like that, and then it becomes fetishized. But then as it becomes iconic and fetishized, no one actually sort of like read those historical texts, and as a result, no one actually knows how to sort of like critically, no one knows how to sort of like to critically engage and critically or creatively respond to these historical texts. So it just becomes something that you put on a pedestal, you celebrate, you turn it into an icon, and you kind of worship, rather than taking the spirit of these texts as an invitation to think critically for ourselves in today's context and help use them as perhaps a moral compass or a kind of compass to help us navigate today's world, right? So it doesn't mean that we just have to sort of like uncritically celebrate or a figure like Gendun Chopel, but I think Gendun Chopel will want us to, embody that spirit of criticality that he once sort of like, celebrated and was trying to promote during his time.
Sedon. Well, my first encounter with Gendun Chopel was through Treatise of Passion. Hopefully, I completely understand. Like I said, it is a learning curve and a learning process, and I do believe but we all start somewhere. We all start somewhere, and I think that was what it was for me too for a long time, because I think the pressure of being Tibetan or Nepali or belonging to the Himalayan culture and knowing who Gendun Chopel was, while not being brought up in, let's say, a Tibetan community or thing. These are experiences a lot of people go through. So where do we start, right? Because these are names that we easily hear and are icons that are up there. But a lot of us don't know, and it's okay not to know. It's not something. It's good to know at times, because it is a part of history where we become more aware. But it is okay also not to know much, and it's okay to make, to have, I guess I would say, reactions that a lot of people might find. Maybe it's just, but it is how we are. We all are at different stages, and I think reacting to it differently. And I think, like you said, I think it's just we have to encourage ourselves to be more comfortable, to be reading, to not just putting it on a pedestal, but actually reading more of the works there. Because that's it.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Simon, for being open and generous and sharing thoughts with all of us, and Sedon as well.
Think me, yeah, you've been more than generous. All of you have been more than generous.
But just mutual generosity. I hope it keeps moving on. But thank you so much, Sedon, as well, for discussing this with us and also opening different avenues for the audience to engage with Gendun Chopel as well. So that's great. And also the audience as well. Thank you so much for sitting there patiently and listening to all of us sort of grapple with this figure. And it's starting to get really cold, so we have some tea and cookies out there. So please have some warm tea, and feel free to interact with us even now. And yeah, maybe I can take this opportunity to also announce that the Triennale will be finally physically opening 1st of March, 2nd of March, and 3rd of March. So there are a bunch of activities and programs going to happen, and all the venues are finally going to also open in the first week of March. So we will be very happy to have you again come and engage with the work as critically as you have with Simon Soon's work as well. So yeah, please feel free to have the tea. Please follow Kathmandu Triennale on Instagram, Facebook. What else you can write us letters if you want. Yeah, thank you so much.